Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture.
And this week we are talking about the much anticipated The Merge.
For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it.
Welcome to another episode of Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen. And this week we are talking about the much anticipated The Merge. It sounds like reminds me of The Purge, that movie, for some reason. So
it.
It's pretty crazy, actually.
You'd like
Have you seen it, Brock?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's multiple of them now.
Are there?
That's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah, they have a bunch of sequels.
All right. Well, we'll discuss that another time. So there's a lot going on this week with the merge, and basically what we're doing is we're going from proof of work to proof of stake, and it's a really big deal, especially, if you've been in this space for a while. You've heard things like Casper being thrown out at DevCon, and tried to watch some of Vlad's speeches, and if you're like me, forget it. You to follow him is very difficult. But regardless, it's a big week for, I think, all of blockchain, and everyone's paying attention to it. So let's just start with, what is proof of stake and why is this such a big deal?
We all know that with the traditional like Bitcoin technologies and Ethereum, ETH1 as we like to call it, proof of work was the idea that you had all these huge mining rigs, these huge setups, and you use that to pretty much solve the hashing problem that created and proposed another block. And that block was then used, and if it was valid, it would be included in the chain. Whoever could figure it out first got a reward, and that reward was the reason why you had these huge incentivized pushes for these huge mining farms, these big rigs of technology that we'll discuss later. But they're very power heavy, and depending on things going on in the world, energy prices, things like that, even though they're pseudo reliable. For example, back was it 2020 or 2021 where China had a power outage and a whole bunch of miners went offline, and it was significant, but it was dependent on just raw materials, raw energy.
But why, so John, explain that. Let's just pretend that I know nothing about blockchain. This is actually This may be important for some people. So, like proof of work, right? Like, what are these computers doing?
They're solving a mathematical equation. Proof of work means the computers are actually solving some type of mathematical hashing algorithm to solve a problem. And that's why it's called proof of work, because it's actually doing a lot of work to solve a problem. It's think of it as like your proof of work as you're proving something with a degree of utility, and that utility is computing power. Where proof of stake,
why though? Why are these computers? Brock, you feel free to jump in. Why are these computers battling to solve this algorithm?
So the whole point of all of this is finding a way to secure the blockchain. So doing proof of work, it forces a high barrier to entry to write to the blockchain. So only high powered computers are able to write to the blockchain, and even those high powered computers are only going to be selected, i.e. find the right solution a select number of times. So it creates this network effect, and through that network effect, the idea is you're securing and validating the blockchain one block at a time, and no single computer or entity can take over the blockchain.
Okay, so basically we have this public database that we found is very valuable to do things like transactions. And in order to secure this database, because it's public, we need to have some kind of incentive mechanism that gives people the ability to secure it, but also be economically incentivized to spend the money to, pay their electricity costs. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep, the ROI is very high.
I wouldn't say very high, but
yeah. Well, so depending on what time you entered kind of the ecosystem, some people, their ROI or return on investment was like maybe 2 months if they were lucky, and some people it might be a couple years. It's all depends on the price of ETH and when you entered the ecosystem. Now, to Stephen's original point, the proof of stake is a different kind of way of thinking about it, and I think it should be a twofold discussion here. Why go to the proof of stake? Why do that? And there's a lot of philosophies out there, but a big reason is, first of all, the cost and also throughput. The idea is that if you could bet on certain transactions, so proof of stake, that you can reduce the need for all that computing power, because a lot of it, there's already a network of these computers and people in the ecosystem in a community. If it was only 3 computers, you went from proof of work to proof of stake between 3 entities, the idea of security is still relatively low. So with the world we live in, with energy costs, and understanding that computers use a lot of power, this will reduce the consumption of energy and computing power by 99, I think, 0.5% globally. And that's huge if you put that into perspective. So the difference between proof of work to proof of stake is how it's going to figure out the blocks and the mechanism behind that. And there's a few different layers that we can discuss in this conversation about how it's going to navigate and do that. So,
yeah, no, that's helpful. So, okay, so we're going where we're basically betting instead of having these computers do all the work. Brock, break that down a little bit. Give me what does that mean, betting, and how does this actually secure the network?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the nodes aren't betting, right? It's that the owners of the validators now in the proof of stake world are staking at least 32 Ethereum, so they have a financial incentive.
Right.
They're invested in the network. Mm-hmm. And there's an algorithmic way at a network level to choose which validator produces the next block. So rather than like vying for position.
So yeah, I think betting is maybe a bad word. It's more that it's in their best interest to validate that it's right, or they lose money. It's all about, the incentive is to be truthful. If the consensus of the network is you're not truthful, you lose money. So you can't rig the game. You can take blocks, and that's a big thing with flash bots and people who are talking about how can you build blocks after the merge happens, and what's their incentive to give good blocks. And then the idea is the validator.
So you're producing. So there's basically, as I understand it, so without being a developer, the economics in this is, look, we're going to reduce electricity costs, great, but we're going to basically do 2 things. We're going to reduce the ETH issuance from 4.3% down to like 0.43%. That's great. And then if we take EIP 1559, which basically burned ETH during transactions, basically post-merge, the ETH issuance is going to drop basically 90%. So it's going to, it's all proportional, but so basically there's going to be less ETH. Let's just put it that way. And then the second part is that ETH becomes a native bearing asset. So that's, John, that's to your point. What you're saying is, or John, or maybe Brock, betting is not the right word. You're producing blocks, and then unless you produce a bad block where you get slashed, where you lose your 32 ETH, there's
it's collateral. At the end of the day, it's like anything in the banking system or anywhere. I think that's the best word. It's collateral. If you do not do a good job, your ETH's gone. That's your collateral.
Well, and so both proof of work and proof of stake are means of like securing a blockchain by decentralizing the computing power and decentralizing the trust, right? And so in the proof of stake world, you still need to deter bad actors and promote good actors. And so the way you do that is you enforce that everybody has to put in at least 32 ETH. If you're doing well, the network is going to give you some proportion of a reward. If you're not, you start losing that 32 ETH that you staked. And so that's the basic idea there. And so by doing it that way, you no longer have to compute these hashes. The energy consumption is basically nothing. And hypothetically, you can get to a higher throughput because you could dole out these blocks at a faster rate if you wanted.
Exactly, and that's another huge thing. Now, inherently, proof of stake in theory will work. Well, we'll see what happens. But it, in some essence, it makes it a little less secure than having like a traditional decentralized POW algorithm. Because it's one of those things. Eventually, it's just going to get so hard to compute, and even though you trust it, having collateral, I think maybe we can discuss this later, but a lot of people are asking like,
it's easier to have cash than it is to have than that is to have hardware to mine. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So isn't it easier to bring on bad actors online for like some type of DDoS or something like that, or like a 51% attack or whatever you want to call it? So
Well, it's still pretty expensive, right? 32 ETH is like $100,000. So it's not chump change, but I see what
it's
you're
not
saying.
chump change, but but if someone if someone can calculate how much they need, and we can always go into how markets work, but if they just need to know how much they need, they can easily spin up as many stakers as they need with that 32 ETH and try to mess around with it.
So in the current proof of work world for Ethereum specifically, I don't have the exact numbers, but there's roughly, I think it's like less than 5,000 nodes running. So these are like the number of miners out there that are like securing the blockchain. In proof of stake, there's already, I think, over 6,000. And so just at like that, if we're taking 6,000, right, times say $100,000, you're at 600 million. So somebody would need to put up like 350 million and set up all the infrastructure in order to
do any damage. Attack. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's not impossible, but it's
not impossible, but it is doable.
But also the idea is that like average people like who can come up with 32 ETH or even go through staking pools, and so they don't have a full 32 ETH, but they can participate in a pool. It starts to spread out this even further. So if we get to say 20,000 nodes,
it dwindles.
Yep, it gets harder.
Like these numbers sound more along the lines of like organized crime, and again, what's their incentive? They would probably like this more, this technology. So,
well, if you're talking about 350 million, that's look. If I'm Russia, that's a drop in the bucket. So hey, if I'm Jeff Bezos or if I'm Elon Musk and I'm bored on a Saturday afternoon, I mean that actually is way lower than I thought it would be. Is that you sure that number's right?
No, it's half. It should have been 650 because you would need to put up the 6,000, the existing 5,000 POW that will go to
you're
POS.
Right. You're right. You'd have to. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so it'd go to total over 10. So it'd be around 720, give or take a million.
But still, you could do it for less than $1 billion.
Less than $1 billion to But actually, that number is actually not right either. Well, hold up, that number is not right either. So the existing 10,000 would have to have half compromised to do that. So you need an existing 10,000 nodes. So it will be well over $1 billion.
Yeah. Well, if there's currently 6,000, then you need like 6,001 new nodes that you control.
Well, no. If let's just say theoretically it switched yesterday with the 5 and 6, it'd be 10,000. Let's say a bad actor wanted to get involved, they would need another 10,000 plus, which would bring it to a little north of 1.1 billion, if it wanted to build up that network.
Well, it's worth noting that the miners don't convert to validators in this world. So the miners become
right. Yeah,
and there's no conversion.
100%. Yeah, that's a good point. Oh, yeah. No, you're right.
So then it is
so there's
6,000 staking nodes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds that's so okay. So if you want to do a 51% attack today on proof of work, you have to be a sovereign country, basically. At least you have to have I forget what the number is. I wish I had it. Do you guys know what the number is? It's something ridiculous. It's like hundreds of I don't know. It's a big number. I forget what it is, but it's way bigger than a half a billion. We're sure that that's right.
Well, so to do a 51% attack, the issue right now is hardware. Like nobody can get enough hardware to do that in proof of work. But if you could buy a single rig for, I don't know, say 10 grand. You only need 5,000 of them. So you're looking at like 50
Well,
million.
this is a topic for later. But if people who are listening to this are NVIDIA fans, NVIDIA might actually push out their next generation GPUs because of proof of stake. Because you're going to have a flood of looking at the macroeconomics of the world, you're going to have a flood of GPUs hitting the market.
GPUs are
So
plummeting.
why would they?
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
that the hardware's out there.
Nice plug, John. You getting paid by NVIDIA?
I wish. I gave them way too much money in the last 10 years. No,
all right,
5 years.
So okay, so let's get back to so the merge is happening in a couple of days. We've got this beacon chain that's been out, I think, since let's say December 1st, 2020, somewhere around that time. We've got the beacon chain, and then we have the Ethereum chain, and basically it's called the merge because we're going to merge these two. What does that look like, and what are the possible security vectors? We'll start with you, Brock, and then we'll pass it to you, John.
John's going to have way better answers here. My rough understanding
we'll see about that.
It's less of a merge and more of a switchover. So we call it the merge because we're saying that the state chains will be merged, but really we're going to stop using proof of work. And by stop using, that means that greater than 51% of the network has agreed that we're going to switch over to proof of stake. So there's lots of things that can go wrong with this. It's a classic hard fork. We've seen it in the past. You have, we've had several hard forks in Ethereum before. And so each one of those spins off us like an old separate Ethereum chain. And this is where you end up with currencies like Ethereum Classic. You'll likely
2.0.
see some version of Ethereum that's left over. So if you're holding Ethereum right now, you might get two versions of that in a couple of days. So you can have the network reject.
That's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to happen.
Yeah. Well, if there's a market volume for selling it, yes.
Yeah.
Well, ETH Classic was crazy. It was like, I don't know if you guys had ETH during that split, but it was kind of like, it was crazy because everyone was dumping it, and I couldn't dump it for some reason. And I'm like, oh, this is going to go to zero. And it was crazy. It was like, man, and even if it was trading like $2 at first, and it was like, how is this happening? How do you just have double the amount of ETH, but one's worth less? I don't know that that'll happen this time. I don't know what's going to happen to the old chain, but all right, John, what's the security implications?
So I think just the biggest security implication, my idea is just, if hardware is not, hardware, I'm a firm believer, and you guys back me up, that hardware is the hardest thing to like mock and steal and you need the physical hardware. There's a supply chain, there's scarcity. I think the biggest issue is that 51 attack we previously discussed, but also just I think the biggest threat to the merge, or what we'll call the switchover, is if not enough if there's just a communication issue between validators. And we haven't seen any issues like that, but I think that would be the biggest issue, is having some bug in the validator, and that would automatically just halt the whole chain. Because if there's any validator running that block, versus a lot of the proof of work stuff, the nodes themselves do have bugs, but a lot of them are staggered in version. This is going to be the first version of this mechanism. So if there's a flaw there that's exploited, that could be kind of the end all be all.
All right. So we talked about security. Then what about, is there anything else technically that you guys are curious or concerned about? Just because I just want to talk about the markets for a bit before we wrap up.
Well, so I gotta sneeze.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh man, that the proof of stake got me allergic. So
I think it's that raccoon you have on your chest.
That's not a raccoon. That's a good mic. That's why you could hear me. So don't be dissing my little raccoon. It's a little fuzzy. No, I think I'm excited to see it because we were all back in Prague, what was it, 2018, and listening to this idea. What was it called before it was ETH 2? It's called something else.
Casper.
Not Casper. It had a different name.
No. Serenity.
Serenity. There it is. It was called Serenity. So, I'm excited to see
hold on. This is Casper, right? I mean, from everything I read, this is what those guys were working on. It's just not called Casper, or Casper's a part of it.
Yeah. Well, I think the underlying mechanism is Casper, if I'm not mistaken.
That might be right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see it. It's just, what happens if it flops? Do we go back to POW, like proof of work? Like, what happens if it flops? Like, Vlad is very smart. Like, there's so many people smarter than I can acknowledge, a hell of a lot smarter than me. But what happens if it flops? What if there is like, are we going to go through a cycle? We all remember the days of early Ethereum where nodes needed to be updated like instantaneously overnight because of X, Y, or Z, or, we had a network attack or this or that. So is this switch, well, let's just call it a switch. It's not really a merge, to Brock's point. Is this switch going to create a new cycle of where we're going to have to go through those growing pains of going from POW to POS? Or is it going to be more mature and we can just keep pushing the network and the ecosystem forward? Because that is what I want to see. But the question is, what if that doesn't happen? What happens?
Remember Geth, the wallet? I mean, remember how crazy that was?
Remember when I called it Geeth?
That's what I still run.
Yeah. We still use it. I still use it.
Yeah.
You had to sync with the entire chain. It was like, it's like looking back at Windows 95. It's like, remember we had to like how crazy it was when we had to actually move money around in this ecosystem. But John, I think what happens is that it's very simple. If this fails, central banks adopt it and they use it for their own sovereign currencies. It's much more centralized and everything else goes away.
It's a fair point. I was going to say, once we hit proof of stake, we could potentially, if, and as we get in this, now this is purely speculative disclaimer, if it works out, we see speculation on ETH prices, that forces, a positive pressure on price where people sell off and create more validators, thus pumping it up because you see more validators, more throughput, and that potentially could be a good thing to get it to a healthy level where you have an equilibrium between the amount of people that are running the network and or are, I don't want to say exploiting the network, but are, what's the best word here? Cashing out on the network. Like they need that kind of cash flow, or they need that kind of, what's it called? Money flow, cash flow.
Let me ask two last questions. So, And this is going to lead into next week because I think this would be fun to talk about. So first are the markets. Are you guys buyers? Are you guys sellers? What do you think? Brock, you put it in perspective in terms of the asymmetric downside. There's more downside than upside, which actually I appreciate because I'm kind of sitting on the sidelines on this. But I want to hear you guys answer that, but also and then to end it, what happens to the data that was on the proof of work chain? If you can tee that up, because I think next week you guys we're all working on the data right now, and it'll be really interesting, John, to hear your perspective in terms of all the nodes that you're running, and maybe you can't speak specifically, but at least you can give us a broad overlook. And then Brock, we're literally providing data to people, and we have to take a snapshot because the new chain is basically going to have it's new. There's not much on it. So 2 questions and then we'll wrap it up.
So currently in the market right now, I am I'm selling because right now, and this is my own, I don't want to say conspiracy, but my own philosophy is that there's a lot of money in circulation. And when you look at downturns in markets or, in technologies, the sectors that get hit the hardest are, tend to be the tech sectors, but also certain types of industrial sectors. So for me, I'm kind of waiting for the bottom because I don't think there's a bottom. So I'm kind of holding steady. And to the second question, well, holding steady, still buying ETH because, I like ETH and I believe in the mission. But to the second point, that data, even though the chain will be new, that data is very crucial in understanding patterns. And there's a huge value in understanding human patterns. And that could be a huge data opportunity because that data is rich.
I'm more so curious about you guys are running all these nodes. What is that? You guys, that's a lot of work, right? To go from there's a lot of data on the old chain, then you've got to combine that with the new chain. I don't want to go into it right now, but I'm curious. Next week we should dive into how that's being handled.
Just snapshots. We just keep snapshots of all our data. Most people who are node providers, us included, we just keep 24-hour snapshots of our data. That's it, just in raw form. And of the state chain, Coinbase does the same. Alchemy does the same. It's just the data itself has no meaning except the fact that it's a chunk of data. So as long as we keep a valid chunk of data around, we can always recover a node. We can always, bring volume online. We can always bring more online to handle volume, but there's, not much behind that.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about that next week. But Brock, take us out. 2 questions.
I think I've seen this a lot with stocks. You trade the news and you trade the hype, sell the news. So this is probably something where the optimism for the merge is already priced into the price of ETH, at least in the short term. We'll probably see some sort of downturn. Longer term, though, if the merge goes well, I obviously hope the price of Ethereum will go up. As far as the data, it's worth noting that this merge or the switch is only at the consensus layer. So the chain itself isn't changing. It's not switching. That data exists and will continue to exist. All that's changing is how we create new data on top of it. So there's the data doesn't have to be copied over. All of that is handled seamlessly by the underlying node providers.
So that is a key point, and I'm glad that you said that because I actually didn't know that. I didn't know how that. I know they're 2 separate chains, but yeah, that's interesting. All right, well, we'll wrap it there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Anybody that listens, if you have any questions, comments, hello@missinglinks.fm. And, maybe next week we'll dive a little bit deeper. It sounds actually, maybe that's not even a topic to discuss, but regardless, we'll jump back into it next week. So nice talking with you, fellas.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Adios.